if you remember, like Bob Clark and Doug Campbell, they actually devoted a show. What was it called? The Lies of Fletcher
Yeah,
Pratt?
well, it's a Fletcher Party. What a
Right.
joke.
Yeah.
What an embarrassment. I mean, those.
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Oh, yeah. What's up, everybody? It's me. It's the Triple B, Big Bad Bob, otherwise known as Rob Clark, here with you on this fine and beautiful hot summer day, which also leads to hot summer nights, especially when you slather your meat in Silk City hot sauce, baby. What's up? Welcome to the show. Got a weird one for you today. That's really about the only description I can give you. It involves a serial killer, some kidnappings, some dismemberments, some necrophilia. And it all has to do with the Kennedy assassination. Tangentially. Possibly. So yeah. And we're also going to take a look at Mr. Raymond Cummings' story as well. And a couple other tidbits for good measure. But before we do, as per the usual, let's hear from the fine, delicious sponsor of this show. That's right. It is Silk City Hot Sauces, baby. Big Bad Bob here with you for Silk City Hot Sauces. Why Silk City? Because this hot sauce comes to you directly from Paterson, New Jersey, also known as Silk City. These hot sauces are 100% natural, gluten-free, vegan, contain no chemicals, fillers, dyes, or junk. Everything is packed into recyclable glass containers because glass doesn't leach weird flavors into the product. All other hot sauces are sourced in small batches from locally bought fresh peppers. It's all about the pepper, people. I'm telling you. Your boy, Big Bad Bob, loves his food like he loves his women. Hot and spicy, but not so hot you can't eat them. So, if you love yourself some sauce and you're tired of trying to transform your bland meat into something edible, with the tip of a jar, you will transform your life forever. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com, place an order, and upon checkout, enter the code GUNMAN, that's GUNMAN, for 20% off of your entire order. You won't regret it. Thank me later. Peace. So yeah, that's it. I mean, you can support the show for free. All you got to do is listen. All you got to do is write a review. All you got to do is share it, interact on social media. And yeah, all that's greatly appreciated. If you're not following along on YouTube, make sure you go subscribe to the Lone Gunman YouTube channel, the Lone Gunman Podcast. Just search for that, and I'll pop right up. You're missing a giant trolling session in every comment on every video. Oh, I love YouTube. It's the best. It's the best. Um, so yeah, coming up, big announcements, big announcements, big announcements. Let's get these out of the way real quick. Your boy, Big Bad Bob, and my buddy Joe Borelli are going to be presenting at Lancer this year. That's right. Never thought it would happen, but it's happening. It's happening. And we couldn't be more thrilled about it. And I didn't want to do it unless I could bring you something massively awesome, huge, new, revelatory. Who wants to sit there and listen to the same old, boring, recycled crap? Not me, that's for sure. And I know a little about a lot, and a lot about a little. And but this presentation this year at Lancer, I'm telling you, you are going to want to either get your butt to Dallas so you can see it in person, or you are going to want to order the stream. Order the stream or the download. I'm telling you, you're going to want to catch it. Because you know your boy doesn't mess around. I don't waste time. And I wouldn't waste your time. So head over to, let's see, what is it? LancerPublications.com. I apologize. That's JFK Lancer Publications.com right now. And secure your tickets or admittance to the JFK Lancer conference this year. It's going to be a banger, folks. A banger. All right. So I told you this one was going to be weird, right? So a lot of people really, really dig true crime podcasts and stories about true crime, and this will fit right in nicely. So, just a little background before we get to the meat on the bone, if you will. At around 5:30 p.m. on Sunday, March the 13th, 1977, John LeMay, a 17-year-old boy, told his next-door neighbor that he was going to go to Redondo Beach to see a guy he'd met at a gym in downtown L.A. whose name was Dave. Now, when John didn't come home that night or the next day, his hysterical mother called the El Segundo police, certain that something had happened to him, claiming that her son didn't just go off for days at a time. Police chalked it up as just another teen runaway. But on March 18th, 5 days later, the remains of John LeMay, who was a homosexual teen, were discovered beside a highway south of Corona, California. He had been carefully dismembered, all the body parts washed and drained of blood and neatly packed into 5 industrial trash bags. Each bag was carefully sealed with nylon filament tape, and 3 of the bags had been crammed into an empty 80-gallon oil drum. The other 2 left on the ground next to it. The boy's head was missing, but a birthmark clearly identified the remains as belonging to John LeMay. The 70s was a confusing time for young people, particularly young gay people. The AIDS epidemic hadn't been named as a serious threat yet, and the popularity of gay bathhouses, gay bars, and anonymous sex in parks, public toilets, and parties was at its frenzied zenith. Gays were coming out with a vengeance, and they were finally taking what they considered their rightful freedoms. In the wave of the free love 60s in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, young people headed to California in droves. Gay teens were drawn there as if to Mecca. Misunderstood youths ran away from unsympathetic parents, stuck out their thumbs, and headed to the promised land. They didn't necessarily find what they were looking for. Many of them ended up as boy prostitutes, trying to eke out a meager living. According to Dennis McDougall in his book Angel of Darkness, during the 70s and early 80s, more than 100 young hitchhikers bought rides on the streets and freeways of Southern California and did not live to tell about it. They were young, pretty, and eventually desperate. According to Berkeley psychologist Michael Evans, homosexuals are an easy population to get access to in some anonymous way. Chicago Police Sergeant Richard Sandberg put it another way: the gays are easy prey. Hitchhiking has never been a safe mode of transportation, but in the 1970s, getting into a car with a stranger was a horrifyingly common occurrence. Predators cruised the highway and beach highways. They frequented bars, hoping to find young boys in an agreeable state of inebriation. Sometimes they were looking for money, sometimes for quick, impersonal sex. Sometimes they wanted to vent their frustrations and rage on someone, anyone, unsuspecting. While homosexuals constitute only about 5% of serial killers, they are more prone to overkill than their straight counterparts, indulging in the more horrific extremes of torture, mutilation, and dismemberment. According to Harold Schechter in the Serial Killer Files, gay men are also among the most prolific of serial killers. The sheer promiscuity of their crimes is a kind of grotesque mirror of the free-ranging sexual lifestyle embraced by so many gay men in the pre-AIDS era of the 1970s. And at this point, I should probably point out that I did not write this. Okay, this is from Elizabeth Engstrom of the Crime Library. Why homosexual killers as a group should be especially sadistic is an interesting question. Thought one element is surely the prevailing homophobia of American society, which causes many gay men to grow up with a deep-seated sense of self-hatred, a violent homophobia of their own. When these feelings are combined with the psychopathology of a serial killer, the results can be particularly appalling. The FBI estimates that between 10 and 50 serial killers are still at large in America at any time. Patrick Wayne Kearney, folks, was born in Texas in 1940, the youngest of three boys. He was thin, shy, sickly, and an easy target for schoolyard bullies. By the time he was 8 years old, he knew he was going to kill people. By the time he was a much ridiculed teen, he was actively fantasizing about murder. His fantasies were very detailed. And then he tried it. It started in the mid-60s in Tijuana and San Diego. He picked up gays in bars, bus stops, places where gay men congregated, looking for a quickie in the bushes. They were easy to find, easy to kill, and the bodies easy to dispose of in the desert. But in his public life, Kearney appeared normal. He put his time in with the Army as well as into a short marriage. Neither of those situations suited him. In 1962, Kearney met David Hill. Hill was married and an Army veteran, and a 6'2" high school dropout from Lubbock, Texas. Hill joined the Army in 1960 but was quickly discharged on diagnosis of an unspecified personality disorder. Back in Lubbock, he married his high school sweetheart, but like Kearney's trial marriage, Hill's was short-lived. When he met Kearney, Hill divorced his wife and moved to California in 1967. Patrick got a good job as an aeronautics engineer with Hughes Aircraft, and David stayed home and kept house. But though it was love at first sight when they met, their 10-year life together was tumultuous and stormy. Frequently, Hill would stomp out of the house and go spend a few nights with some friends. or he'd pick up a one-night stand out of frustration and revenge. Occasionally, he went all the way home to Lubbock, but he always came back. When Hill was gone, Kearney's impotent frustrations reached a boiling point. There was only one thing he knew that would satisfy those feelings of repressed rage. When Hill left the house after a fight, Kearney would go prowling. He'd jump in his Volkswagen and go out to pick up hitchhikers or young men from gay bars. Being of slight build, he had a surefire system of subduing his victims. He would shoot them in the head with a .22 caliber pistol without warning. Sometimes he'd be driving down the highway, paying strict attention to the speed limit, with his left hand on the steering wheel, then shoot his victim in the passenger seat with his right. Then he'd drive around until he found a suitably private place for him to relieve his frustrations, vent his rage, and wield his power. As soon as he was alone with their corpses, he would undress them and have sex with them. Then he would employ the hacksaw and cut them into pieces. If he was at home, he did this in the bathroom, fastidiously washing each body part and draining it of blood to keep it from smelling. He left no fingerprints in the dried blood. He learned all this from carefully reading the notorious crimes of Dean Corll, who murdered 17 young boys in Houston, wrapped them up in trash bags, and buried them. Kearney studied Corll's heinous crimes and collected newspaper clippings as news of his torture and murder spree came to a violent conclusion when one of his vicious accomplices killed Corll with his own gun. Most of Kearney's victims reminded him of the type of person who had given him a bad time during his teenage years. Blonde and arrogant. Sometimes after he killed them and had sex with their corpses, he would also beat them. Patrick Kearney wasn't the only one killing young people in Southern California during this time. The Hillside Stranglers, Angelo Buono, and his equally psychopathic cousin, Kenneth Bianchi, were plying their trade in the same area at the same time, abducting young girls, torturing them, strangling them, and dumping their bodies wherever convenient. The famed and still unidentified Zodiac Killer was on the loose, taunting police and raining terror with his random murders. The Zebra Killers were randomly hacking people to death with machetes in San Francisco and closer to home. Randy Kraft was proving to be one of the all-time most demented killers of gays with his incomprehensible sadistic torture methods. William Bonin, with his sidekick Vernon Butts, was also committing horribly grisly murders on young gay men and discarding their remains alongside the freeways. No wonder the police were confused. They didn't know how many serial killers they had, and they didn't know how many of them were copycats. But as the body count rose, they noticed some marked differences in the modus operandi. One murderer, later to be identified as Randy Kraft, routinely picked up hitchhikers, gays, Marines, or whoever caught his fancy. He would drug them, torture them for hours, and ended up by castrating them and shoving whatever was handy, a broom handle, a tree branch, a pole, the victim's own genital or underwear, into their rectums. Damn. He usually did this while the victim was still alive and screaming. Well, Randy Kraft, it sounds like a monster. William Bonin strangled his victims with rope, cord, or the victim's own t-shirt before raping the corpses and throwing the bodies to the side of the road. But one killer stood out from the others by carefully dismembering his victims, cleaning them up, and tidily bagging them. The press called these the trash bag murders. The homicide cops called them the tag in a bag murder. Wait a minute. Hold on. The homicide cops called them the fag in a bag murders. That's just wrong. Wow. I apologize, folks. This is okay. Let's see here. The the most prolific serial killers also tend to be the most organized. They methodically stalk their victims for the best opportunity to strike so as not to be seen, and they smartly dump the bodies far away so as to not leave any clues. Although anyone can be targeted, says James Allen Fox and Jack Levin in The Will to Kill, victims of serial killers tend to be the most vulnerable in society: children, prostitutes, and the elderly. But the most striking and intriguing aspect of serial murderers, is the nature of their motivation to satisfy an intense appetite for power and sadism. The serial murderer tends to kill not for love, not for money, not for revenge, but just for the fun of it, because it makes them feel good. Yeah. Because John LeMay, remember back to the 17-year-old boy at the beginning of the story, told his neighbor that he was going to visit someone named Dave in Redondo Beach, the police equated it with a name that regularly appeared on the sign-in sheets at the gay bathhouses, and soon were knocking on the door of the modest Kearney Hill home in Redondo. Kearney and Hill welcomed them in and seemed to be relaxed, concerned about the missing boy, and totally innocent. While there, though, investigators helped themselves to a few carpet fibers because for the first time in a trash bag murder, carpet fibers have been caught up in the nylon filament tape used to seal the bags. And the police had a match. As soon as the police left, Kearney destroyed all the files he kept on Dean Coral. The police came back and asked for samples of Kearney's and Hill's pubic hair, as well as hairs from their dog. The pair cooperated fully. All the fibers and hair matched evidence left on LeMay's body. But when the cops went back again, this time with a search warrant, the couple had fled. Police found a hacksaw with a fresh, clean blade, but little bits of blood and tissue were caught up in the corners of it. John LeMay's blood and tissue, actually. They found residual blood all over the bathroom, although invisible to the naked eye and clearly there under forensics examination. They found familiar nylon filament tape, and a search of Kearney's office at Hughes Aircraft offered up a source of the exact same trash bags used in what was looking like upward of 20 murders, people. 20. Let's see. The Hillside Strangler Investigation Task Force was construed as a public relations vehicle. The LA Police Department, going through the usual high-profile motions to reassure the public, set up a special task force which included the investigating officers from the Glendale Police Department and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office. Not that they had anything new to go on, but all the busy promotion and news conferences looked good on television, according to Ian Brady in The Gates of Janus. The pressure was on Kearney and Hill, too, with their photographs posted on posters. When the heat was clearly on, Kearney and Hill had fled back to Texas, but knew that the life on the lam was not for them. The cops knew who they were, what they looked like. At the behest of relatives, the pair then returned to California, and on July 1st, 1977, walked into Riverside County Sheriff's Office, pointed to a wanted poster, and said, "We're them. We are them." They were booked on suspicion of 2 murders and had been wanted for questioning in connection with 6 other slayings. They were arraigned on the 2 murder charges, and bail was set at $500,000 each. Kearney cooperated fully with the police. He said the murders excited him and gave him a feeling of dominance. The idea of hurting and killing someone sounded sexually exciting. When officers grilled him about picking up Marines and feeding pills and booze to his victims, they got a blank look from him. They persisted, wanting to know if he had ever put anything but his penis into the victims' rectums. Why, sir, that's quite a personal question. He used towels to keep the bodies from leaking all over his bathroom before he dismembered them. The police persisted, hoping to put to rest more of their freeway mysteries. How about torture, fella? Did he ram anything into the anus for the sheer pleasure of it? Recognition crossed Kearney's face, and he shook his head. I am not the wooden stake killer. He knew exactly what the detectives were getting at, but impaling, strangling, and torturing victims was not his style. A bullet to the head was clean and simple. He seemed offended that he would be confused with that sick son of a bitch, Randy Kraft. The trash bag murders investigation began officially on April 13, 1975, when the body of Albert Rivera, age 21, of L.A., was found near Highway 74, just east of San Juan Capistrano, in a heavy-duty trash bag. But according to Kearney, in a series of letters, confessions, and conversations with the police, the killings had begun much earlier, all the way back to the 1960s in Tijuana and San Diego. He led them to the site where he had buried one of his first victims, known only as George, or Jorge, if you will, behind his and Hill's Culver City apartment. The victim was killed around Christmas 1968. The police dug where Kearney indicated and came up with a skeleton with a single bullet hole in its skull. After killing George, a paranoid Kearney laid low for over a year, but nobody came knocking on his door, and he realized that he had actually gotten away with murder. A neighbor said she occasionally heard what she thought were gunshots, but had no idea they came from the Kearney and Hill apartment. After his arrest, Kearney wrote letters to the police detailing the crimes, the names of the victims, and the places the bodies could be found. An 18th count of murder was filed the same day that the 13th Hillside Strangler victim was found. And as for John LeMay, well, Hill wasn't home when his young lover came to the house, so Kearney invited him in to watch television. Without provocation, Kearney had shot LeMay in the back of the head and later dumped his remains in the desert. He liked using the desert. The desert animals and insects removed evidence quickly and efficiently. Things disappear very rapidly in the desert, he told investigators. You can put a small animal on an anthill and it disappears right in front of your eyes. According to Dennis McDougal, Kearney once said that he had had a flat tire during one of his drives to the desert to dispose of a body. And when he discovered that the spare was flat too, he had to call a tow truck to get his car to a service station. Kearney stood by, sweating bullets while the attendant fixed the flat, never questioning the bags in the back seat, which contained arms, legs, rib cage, and some intestines. Another time, he locked his keys in the car while inspecting possible dump sites. It took him hours to jimmy open the lock with a coat hanger, nervously looking over his shoulder the whole time, with freshly filled trash bags again in the back seat. As soon as the bags were unloaded, though, he felt an enormous sense of relief, accomplishment, and power. After hearing 3 hours of evidence, the Riverside County Grand Jury refused to indict David Hill. Public Defender Malcolm McMillan spirited him out of the jail under a cloak of secrecy to protect him from the reporters and photographers. Hill then fled California and returned to Lubbock, Texas. Riverside DA Brian Morton said the evidence against Mr. Hill was very weak, adding that much of the information unearthed by Riverside tended to exonerate Hill. McMillan said he was not surprised to hear the grand jury refuse to indict Hill, adding that he did not think there was sufficient evidence to hold him to answer in Superior Court. Kearney said that Hill was neither involved nor aware of his murders. He said that he committed all the murders when Hill was away. Did Kearney take all the blame to free an innocent man or to absolve his lover? Is it likely that Hill was innocent? Against the advice of his attorney, Patrick Kearney changed his not guilty plea to a plea of guilty. His attorney advised him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but Kearney pleaded guilty to the original 3 charges of murder and asked to be sentenced immediately in an apparent move to avoid California's death penalty. His actions were moot. The death penalty law didn't go into effect until August of 1977, and all of Kearney's homicides predated that time, so the death penalty was never an option for prosecutors. Superior Judge John Hughes handed down a life term with the possibility of parole in 7 years. Judge Breckenridge said this defendant has certainly perpetrated a series of ghastly and grisly crimes, and I can only hope the Community Release Board will never release Mr. Kearney. He appears to be an insult to humanity. For what seems to be approximately 32 murders, Kearney was eventually charged with 21 counts of murder and received 21 life sentences. If all of his confessions are truthful, he also murdered 2 children ages 5 and 8, along with 4 victims whose bodies were never recovered. At least 7 of his victims remain unidentified. Patrick Kearney is today living out his life sentences in California. He writes essays and has had a few of them published. David Hill played himself in an episode of History's Mysteries, Infamous Murders for the History Channel in 2001. The trash bag murders are considered among the most heinous crimes of the 20th century. Patrick Kearney's swath of death ranks him with the likes of Jerry Brudos, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and John Wayne Gacy. According to Los Angeles Homicide Sergeant Al Sett, if he hadn't gotten sloppy, consciously or unconsciously, he'd probably still be doing it today. So there you have it, folks, on the trash bag killer, Patrick W. Kearney. So now, I'm sure you're like, okay, Rob, I'm sure you have a good reason for telling us all this, and I'm sure it has to do with the Kennedy assassination in some form or fashion. And I'm here to tell you that it does. It does, in fact. Because you'll remember that Scary Hill guy, his buddy, was from Texas. Well, Patrick Kearney was also in Texas from like 1962 to 67, something like that. I mean, he was moving back and forth or traveling a lot, but so this would mean that Patrick Kearney was in Texas in 1962 and 1963. There is your red flag people. So then I came across this very interesting news clip from Australia. And it's from this woman who had been corresponding with serial killers. And one of the serial killers that she was writing back and forth with was none other than Patrick Kearney, the trash bag killer. And boy, did he have a story for her. So now, without further ado, let's hear from Down Under, the thunder from Down Under. Here we go.
Well, The CIA and FBI might have convinced President Trump to block the release of some files relating to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, but Trump says he'll release more files, except those with the names and addresses of people who are still alive. Now, true crime writer Amanda Howard has been following this release very closely, and she has some surprising information that not even the president knows about. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Now, before we get to your world-exclusive information, can we briefly recap what's been revealed in those official releases of information relating to the assassination of JFK?
Okay, so there's about 2,500 extra files that have come out the last couple of days.
Wow.
So that's a lot of reading. A lot of it actually has to do with Oswald going to Mexico. So for 2 months before the assassination, he was being held under surveillance. So it's quite interesting that before he killed the president, they were watching him.
He was a person of interest even then.
He was a person of interest before the assassination.
Yeah.
So
which question mark, question mark, question mark.
conspiracy hashtag, all of that.
So did he do it? He was arrested for it, but did he? Is that what it's being confirmed?
If he was under surveillance, how did they not surveil him to the
book depository? Exactly. So we get into a lot of theories that are involved in these new files, and there's also a lot of investigations into what was happening in Cuba, and that the CIA asked the mob if they would take out Castro and all sorts of things like this. So in these new files, we're not saying anything about the actual assassination on that day, but there's all this background information that's coming out now about what was happening to Oswald and what they knew about him before this actually happened.
So you have new information? That's a revealing letter. So who's the letter from, this new information?
Okay, well, I have a letter from a serial killer in the States. So Patrick Kearney is his
Everyone's
name.
got a pen pal.
I have many of them as part of my research. And we've actually been discussing Oswald because he was friends with him prior to the assassination, obviously, because
What was
he died
his
the
name
next
again?
day. Patrick Kearney.
Right.
So he was known as the trash bag killer, and he started picking up hitchhikers in '65 and murdering them. He killed at least 21 people. But he was friends with Oswald before the assassination, and he actually drove Oswald to the Mexican border, and he actually spoke about going with him. So
how do we trust a serial killer, though, with those details?
That's what we have to actually think about, how much of this is true, but he was there at the same time.
And what did he say about the ride to Mexico?
Well, I think we've got some details.
Let's look at some quotes. We'll start out with this quote. We had both attended military language school and had been in top secret military language operations. In fact, I met Oswald through a friend who had also done these things. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, we know a lot when you watch shows like JFK by Oliver Stone. They actually talk about Oswald being this linguist and how intelligent he was and everything. But if we look at these files that have just been released, it actually says that he tried to speak Russian to the Russian embassy while he was in Mexico, and they said he barely spoke a word of it. Right. So all of this sort of background that we're told that he's this amazing man and that he was highly intelligent, it's sort of it's starting to fall to pieces.
Right, yeah, right.
What about this next quote? Lee Harvey Oswald said that he was going to hitchhike to Mexico City, but after Mexico he returned to the USA, and then he made a second voyage to Mexico City later. I nearly went with him. Why was he in Mexico?
Well, he wanted to get to Cuba and then to Russia. So he needed to cross the border to actually speak to the embassies to get his visas to actually get there. So and they just found him to be a bit of a pain and tried to tell him to go away. But, the CIA and the Secret Service and the FBI were all standing there watching him do all of this and were intercepting phone calls.
And he wasn't the clandestine genius that we were being led to believe
he was ringing from a public payphone out the front of the embassy because they wouldn't
waving at them from the
they wouldn't let him in. And he kept ringing them over and over again, and that's what all of these new files are about, is that they were basically trying to tell him to go away and they weren't interested. So he wasn't doing it very secretly. So.
Okay, and one more quote from the letter, just to give you a bit of a glimpse inside the personality of Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald sometimes affected a false German accent and tried to pretend that he was some sort of spy. Doesn't sound too bright. How could he have been the mastermind behind the assassination of a president?
Well, I mean, that's the exact point here. I mean, this just proves that case actually falls apart. That this lone gunman who was able to take out the president from the school book depository. If we're told that he could speak all of these languages, but even his fake German accent wasn't very good. I mean, we could do the Germans and all of that, but he wasn't. And that makes the whole case fall apart, because if he isn't intelligent, if he isn't this amazing man, then what happened?
Was he the crack shot? Was he this? Was he
exactly.
that? Yeah.
I mean, and we have him in the papers on the very next day. I mean, within 6 hours, Australia was printing the man's face all over the newspapers.
Ach du Lieber is all I can say. Where's that letter now?
My letter from the serial killer is actually nicely kept away, because things like this, I don't know if the CIA is at my house right now tossing the place. I mean, they could be. They might be knocking on my door.
Let us know if they are. I'm going to put a camera down.
Yes, we will.
That might be worth some money in years to come.
Maybe, but yes, it's more about the historical significance of it all. So, yeah.
What do you think happened, though?
Yeah.
Do you think he did act alone, or what do you think is the true story?
I mean, we don't have 3 hours. President Trump, who actually is a conspiracy theorist himself, absolutely there is more to this. And these current files that have just been released actually show that, that they have the CIA talking to the mob, who's talking to people with poison pen guns and all of this sort of stuff, that there's a lot of people involved. And Kennedy was involved with civil rights and all of that. And then we find out in this file that LBJ was actually in the Ku Klux Klan. So there's a lot of stuff if people keep digging. It's quite interesting what's going on.
Yeah,
so
it's just kind of stirred the pot even more, it seems like.
It has.
What do you think about the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald? Do you think we'll ever know the truth about that? What do you think happened there?
Well, I mean, a nightclub owner is in the police headquarters basement. Now, this is after J. Edgar Hoover himself had rung the Dallas police twice and said there's been threats on his life, and then this Jack Ruby just walks into the basement and shoots him in front of everyone. That shouldn't have happened, but it's about silencing him, and that's all that was about, because he knew, but not enough. He was one piece in a large puzzle.
So who would have made him kill him? Ruby kill Oswald? What was the behind that?
Well, it could have been LBJ, it could have been the mob, it could have been the Russians.
Yes, all the Russians.
There's even a theory that Jackie herself had a gun in the car.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, I mean, it's endless. Do you think we'll ever have an answer?
Well, Trump is bringing out the last 1,800 files or whatever it is over the next 6 months. So by April 28, we should have them all, unless someone takes him out, which, I mean, that wasn't a threat. Just put that out there, because the CIA is at my house now anyway. But I think that there's more to come, and it's going to be those last couple of pages that we're going to find out where that extra shot come from. And
it's a great whodunit.
Oh, I love it.
50 years in the making.
Yes.
Trump doesn't want to bring it out unless people are actually, if they're alive, apparently, you're not allowed to bring out the information. Is that right? Is that why he stalled on releasing the last lot of pages?
Well, he didn't want to stall. He loves the conspiracy. He wants it out there, because this is also a smokescreen for other things. We won't get into all of that as well. But this is something that is in the public interest, and we need to know that we can trust our governments, and this proves that we can't. And the more that comes out, the more we have.
Man, Howard, wow. Thanks for doing all that reading.
So there you have it, folks. The Lee Harvey Oswald brush with a serial killer. Oh, how things would have been different if Patrick Kearney had just started his spree in 1963. Oh, all right. So, from that obscure piece of Australian news, we move on now to Raymond Cummings.
In 1963, the upstairs of this building was the Carousel Club, a burlesque house operated by Jack Ruby. A Dallas Utility Company employee, who was then a part-time cab driver, said that during this period, he once picked up Lee Harvey Oswald, David W. Ferry, and an unidentified older man and brought them to the club. The witness, a former Texas peace officer named Raymond Cummings, was interrogated recently by investigators for New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. Cummings has told the Dallas District Attorney's Office that he telephoned Garrison after reading that David Ferry had never been in Dallas. Cummings claimed, in fact, that he had known Ferry in Dallas even prior to picking him up. Ferry, a former airlines pilot, was found dead in his New Orleans apartment soon after Garrison's investigation of him began. Cummings also said that on another occasion, he picked up Lee Harvey Oswald at a Dallas bus station and took him to Irving. Tomorrow, Cummings and his lawyer will meet with Assistant Dallas District Attorney Bill Alexander to make a formal statement about these matters. Cummings is represented by Dallas attorney Frank Wright. Today, neither Cummings nor Wright would talk with newsmen. This is James Kerr reporting.
During that period, I picked up a man in my cab who I later found to be Lee Harvey Oswald. We talked at length on the way to the address he had given me. Several months later, and to the best of my memory, in early 1963, I was driving my taxi and was stopped by three men. I recognized one of the men as being Lee Harvey Oswald, and we spoke about our previous meeting. I have recently learned from seeing photos that a second man was David Ferry. I cannot identify the third party. At their request, I took the three men to the Carousel Club on Commerce Street in Dallas, Texas, and they left my cab.
Why did you come forth then?
Because of the publicity it was in this here, and due to the fact that I did, at that time, fear for my family.
Having been a policeman, didn't you trust the police to protect you?
Yes.
And a former Marine, the FBI, and other government bodies?
Well, Mr. Coleman, he also knew about the entertainer at the Carousel, I imagine, who claimed he saw someone in the place and what happened to him afterward. He had a lot of harassment, and I think he wound up in Illinois somewhere. You knew about him, didn't you?
Did you think if you waited 3 years that you wouldn't get any publicity?
Well, I was hoping not.
Well, okay. There's still a minute left on this audio clip, but apparently that is it. Sorry about the dead air there for a second, or maybe I'll fix it in editing and you'll never know. There was an extensive period of dead air there. So now you can see why I bundled these two stories together. It's all about picking up Lee Harvey Oswald, one by a serial killer and the other by a cabbie. So, as I said, or as the newsman said, and Raymond Cummings himself, who was the second voice you heard on that tape, he did not come forth during the Warren Commission investigation for fear of his life. But he felt a little more comfortable to come out in 1967 to Jim Garrison. So it was mentioned in the first part of the news story that Raymond Cummings had met with Jim Garrison, the district attorney, in his office, and given them an interview. And I have here the interview summation, not the actual transcript. But this is from William Gervich. Pending the tape transcription of the interview with Raymond Cummings in Dallas by James Alcock and William Gervich, the following report is respectfully submitted based on notes made at the time of the interview. Raymond Cummings was contacted at the VFW Club on Saturday, the 25th of February, 1967, at 9:05 p.m., where he was playing music and was interviewed outside of the club. Cummings works for the Power and Light Company in Dallas and is a former professional wrestler. Ooh, yeah. The cream of the crop always rises to the top, baby. Yeah. Ooh. According to Cummings, he was driving a yellow cab in Dallas between January and May of '63, during which time he recalls picking up Lee Harvey Oswald at the Continental bus station and driving him to an address in Irving, Texas. Oswald did not have enough money to pay the fare, shockingly, and told Cummings this en route to Irving. Oswald apparently saw the tattoo on Cummings' arm and said that he too was an ex-Marine, adding that he only had on him $1.50. Cummings agreed to carry him to Irving and shut the meter off when it reached $1.45 to ensure himself a whopping nickel tip. Cummings recalls that Oswald was dressed rather shabbily and was carrying a canvas-type handbag similar to that servicemen carry. Oswald was wearing a white shirt with sleeves rolled up and was hatless. Cummings conveyed him to a house, but the exact address of which he does not remember. Oswald told Cummings that he was, quote, down on his luck. Cummings offered to go with Alcock and me to Irving in an attempt to locate this house. So we met Cummings on Sunday, the 26th of February, 1967, at 12:01 p.m. and drove him to Irving, Texas, 5 miles west of Dallas. Following Cummings' directions, we crisscrossed numerous streets in the section of Irving that looks familiar to Cummings. Without making a positive identification, Cummings selected 1107 Oakdale Street and said this was more familiar than any other house he had seen with us. The name on the mailbox in front of the house was L.L. Barger. This was a small single residence of wooden construction in a low-income, semi-rural neighborhood. Cummings also informed us that about 1 week after taking Oswald to Irving, that he picked up 3 men at the intersection of Marcellus and the Expressway in Dallas and conveyed them in his cab to Jack Ruby's Carousel Club. Now, according to Cummings, one of these men was again Lee Harvey Oswald. David William Faree, and he cannot identify the third man. He recalls that Faree was unusual looking. Cummings identified photographs of Oswald and Faree from a variety of photographs shown to him and admits having seen pictures of both Oswald and Faree in the newspapers. The third man was about 6 foot in height and looked as if he might have been Italian. Cummings stated that trip sheets at the Yellow Cab Company would assist in corroborating his stories. He has never given this information to anyone, nor has he ever been approached by anyone for information. En route to the Carousel Club, Oswald remembered Cummings and told him he appreciated the favor that he did in taking him to Irving. The 3 men, as Cummings recalls, were talking about Louisiana. Arriving at the Carousel Club, Faree paid the fare and the 3 passengers went upstairs into the club. Cummings described Faree as a, quote, spook in the night and felt sorry for him. Cummings then went upstairs into the club himself and received the $1.50 tip from the man at the door as a gratuity for bringing in customers. Cummings added that to his gratuity system. Cummings added that this gratuity system was not uncommon in the city of Dallas at the time. In this interview, Cummings stated that he disliked the Dallas Police Department. He admitted having been arrested once, and that was in Belton, Texas. Explaining this arrest, Cummings stated his mother was hospitalized and needed surgery, and he had gone to the bank and withdrawn a large sum of money and was arrested for having a pistol in the front seat of his car, which he claims he had for his own protection. Cummings also remarked that he would not object to helping the FBI. Cummings added he has a brother, Wesley Cummings, 38 years of age, residing in L.A., who might have met Faree in Dallas. His brother, according to Cummings, is also an alcoholic. Without being asked, Cummings said he would be willing to come to New Orleans if his fare was paid and take a polygraph test. Raymond Cummings is a white male, 34 years of age, and resides at 924 Robin Hood, Mesquite, Texas, with his wife and children. His phone number is 825-6912. William Gervich, Special Aid. Interestingly enough, of course, on this interview of Raymond Cummings, it's typed, of course, but there's some handwritten notes. And it has R.E. Thornley, Oswald, and Ferry bracketed, and it says in Dallas. So I'm wondering if they showed this fellow pictures of suspects, and he identified Thornley as the third man. Interesting. But then there's also a lot of handwritten notes kind of sideways on this thing. It's very hard to read in very small cursive handwriting. But I'll do my best, folks. It says, no way to evaluate the veracity of Raymond Cummings' statement. It may be something, it may be quite true, or it may be false. We initially were impressed by his apparent truthfulness in telling the story, as I recall, and by some of the details. However, when he came to New Orleans was when he had volunteered and took the lie detector test that he said he would take. The investigative service which provided the test reported to our office that he had, quote, shown deception with regard to substantial details of the story. This caused us to this report on a back shelf. Subsequently, however, we learned that the investigative service, which was, quote, helping the office, had provided lie detector reports of, quote, illegitimate something whenever we sent anyone to them, particularly if the subject had anything to do with the JFK case. Okay, so basically what they're saying here is that the results don't really mean anything because everybody they sent to this company to get a lie detector test came back showing deception, especially when it was something related to the JFK case. Or maybe everybody you sent to him didn't have shit to do with the JFK assassination. Although, this is a guy who is a former Marine, a seemingly stand-up guy with a wife and kids, a family, a working man, former police officer, with absolutely no motive or reason to lie about anything, comes forward to tell what he knows. It just, I mean, you heard the man with your own ears. You can go on YouTube and watch him with your own eyes. He seems like a perfectly normal, you know, man. I don't know. And then I came across this about threats, UPI. Raymond Cummings, a Dallas cab driver who claimed to have carried Oswald twice, once with Ferry to Jack Ruby's joint, said 3 phone calls had threatened his life before his departure for New Orleans. They said, "My time is marked, and I definitely would not be able to get in the plane to come back to Dallas if I went to New Orleans and talked." And this was on March 18th, 1967. So take that for what you will, folks. There's 2 stories of 2 very different individuals claiming to have picked up Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination. And stories about, Lee Oswald taking a cab or taking a bus somewhere, hitchhiking. Think of the Ralph Leon Yates story. It's not out of the realm of possibility because Oswald didn't own a car. And Oswald allegedly didn't have a driver's license. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that he got rides from people, that he hitchhiked, that he rode the bus, that he took cab places. Very, very possible. One other thing I'd like to touch on here that I came across, and it has to do with the arrests in Dealey Plaza on November the 22nd, 1963. And this is a subject we broached here many times on the show about people who were also arrested on November the 22nd, 1963, but there's one in here that I'd never heard before. So let's go through. It says, by late afternoon on the day of the assassination, there was little official doubt in either Washington or Dallas that the assassin was Lee Harvey Oswald. The frantic media assured an anxious world that the case was virtually solved. New leads were hardly pursued after that time. Still, this does not explain the lackadaisical attitude shown by the Dallas police officials immediately after the shots were fired, and even before Oswald was in custody. Nearly a dozen people were taken into custody in and around Dealey Plaza within minutes of the shooting. In some cases, the suspects were taken in for questioning, and in other cases, they were released on the spot. It is forever perplexing that in most of these instances, no records were kept of the identities of those detained. The most famous of those taken into custody have come to be known as the Dallas Tramps. 3 bedraggled-looking men rounded up in the railroad yards near the area of the grassy knoll. They were discovered in a boxcar and, many critics believe, had been a prime location to have something to do with the assassination. Even if they had nothing to do with the killings, the argument goes they should have been regarded as potential witnesses. They had been in a potentially good location to see activities that could have helped an investigation. However, no record exists of what any of them said. There is no record even of their names, or where they came from, or what they were doing in the boxcar behind the grassy knoll. To this day, there is an unending speculation about who these men were. Now, of course, this being written prior to the release of the Dallas police files in the late 80s, where we got the identities of these 3 individuals. This is before they were known. It says, it is ironic that while no official record exists of the detention of the Dallas Tramps, their seizure is one of the best photographed events in Dealey Plaza, aside from the actual assassination. Indeed, the number of photographs provide a solid basis for identification, a point that has contributed immensely to the intense interest in the Tramps. Some critics point out that the photographs show clearly that 2 of the 3 tramps seemed to be tramps only in their dress. Careful inspection shows that their hair is closely and neatly cropped, obviously by a competent barber, and their shoes are thick-soled and in good repair. They are freshly shaven and wearing clothing that appears raggedy, but on close inspection is merely wrinkled. It was more than 2 weeks after the assassination that the Dallas Times-Herald reported that a 31-year-old Dallas man arrested the day of the assassination remained in jail even though he had been cleared of the original suspicion of involvement in the Kennedy killing. The newspaper reported that the man was arrested in the railroad yards. The newspaper described the arrest. The suspect was unarmed when arrested, but booked, along with others arrested in the hectic hours following the assassination, on charges of investigation of conspiracy to commit murder. The newspaper report added that once these charges were dropped, the man continued to be held on, quote, city charges. To this day, the man's identity has not been released. There is no record indicating that any federal or state officers ever questioned the man about what he had seen in the lot behind the stockade fence at the time the shooting started. It's fair to assume that if he had seen nothing suspicious from that vantage point, his testimony would have been used to bolster the official version that nothing unusual was going on behind the stockade fence. Another arrest chronicled by the Times-Herald was that of a young man on the street who was pointed out to police by spectators standing at a third-floor window of the book depository. The newspaper reported that workers were pecking on a window and pointing to a man wearing horn-rimmed glasses, a plaid coat, and raincoat. A Dallas police officer arrested the young man and took him to Sheriff Bill Decker's office nearby. According to the newspaper, which added, with the young man protesting, the crowd all along the way jeered at him as he was escorted across the street. Officers on the case would not explain what connection the man might have with the shooting, nor would they identify him. There is no other record of this incident. Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig, the police officer who had been cited for his superior work, revealed one of the most astonishing arrests. Craig made his statements in a taped interview in 1971 with assassination researcher Gary Shaw. Craig stated that minutes after the shooting, Dallas police detained a Latin man whom they had seized on Elm Street. Craig, who witnessed the arrest, stated that this was the same man he later saw driving the Rambler station wagon that picked up a man in front of the depository. According to Craig, the Latin man was released when he indicated that he no speak no English. So, interesting. Very interesting. While the three tramps, along with the Dallas man, were taken into custody in the general area behind the grassy knoll, other arrests were made on the upper side of Dealey, near the book depository. Directly across Houston from the depository building was the Dow Tex building. Some critics and researchers have long believed that this building is the most logical location for a second gunman. Indeed, if a shot fired from that position nearly coincided with one fired from the 6th floor of the depository, two things could be accomplished. First, it could at last explain how two shots could be fired in 1.66 seconds. Second, the bullet, by striking Connolly an instant after Kennedy was hit, could relieve the magic bullet of its miraculous performance. In any event, at least 3 people who were in the Dow Tex building were detained by authorities. Photographs show police searching one young man who claimed to have wandered into the Dow Tex in search of a telephone. When he found that all of the lines were tied up, he left the building, outside of which he encountered police. He was taken to the sheriff's office and then released. Another young man was led from the Dow Tex by police. He was described as wearing a black leather jacket and black leather gloves. There is no record of his statement. Of all the activity at the Dow Tex building, nothing is more astonishing than the arrest of a shadowy figure with a pocketful of aliases. On that day, he used the identity of Jim Braden. Dallas police took him into custody after an elevator operator pointed out that his passenger did not have a familiar face. Braden, who then had an FBI rap sheet about 36 arrests, was in Dallas on the day of the assassination because of a meeting on the previous day with one of H.L. Hunt's sons to discuss some oil leasing business. It so happened that Oswald's killer, Jack Ruby, was also in the H.L. Hunt offices that day, but there is no record indicating that there was a common meeting of Braden, Ruby, and any of the Hunts. Braden claimed that he had been walking along the streets near Dealey Plaza when the shooting started. He tried to flag down a taxi but had no luck. As he was walking past the Dowtex, he inquired of someone standing out front of if a public telephone was available inside. He was told he might find one on the 3rd floor. Braden claims he went to the 3rd floor, found the phone was out of order, and immediately returned to street level by the elevator. Deputy Sheriff C.L. Lewis, tipped off by the elevator operator, took Braden into custody and escorted him into the sheriff's office for questioning. Braden apparently, though, was well prepared. A few months earlier, he had started using the name Jim Braden. In reality, he was Eugene Hale Brading, and if Dallas police had been given that name, they might have readily identified him as a man with serious felony convictions around the country, including burglary, embezzlement, mail fraud, and conspiracy. Braden was released about an hour later. The sheriff's office accepted his story that he was simply in town on oil business. So, there you have it, folks. A lot of crazy, well, a couple new that I hadn't heard about. Such as the man in the black leather jacket and the black leather gloves arrested. Also, fellow arrested because the people on the 3rd floor of the school book depository were pecking on the window saying, "Hey, arrest that guy," who had horn-rimmed glasses and a raincoat on. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, that is about it for this show, folks and friends. So once again, thank you for tuning in. Go get yourself some hot sauce from SilkCityHotSauce.com. Enter the code GUNMAN at checkout for 20% off of your entire order. Make sure you check out Lancer this year, folks. Your boy and his buddy Joe Borelli will be presenting. You won't want to miss it. It's going to be blockbuster type stuff. So make sure you check it out. Follow along on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at The Lone Gunman 7. And on YouTube, search for The Lone Gunman Podcast channel and subscribe and get notified. Anyway, that's it for this week, folks. Thank you. And until we meet again, my friends, enjoy the beautiful sounds of Shepherd of Fire and their hit single, Conspiracy. Listen to the words, folks.
from the 18 bullet. Kennedy apparently shot in the head. He fell face down in the back seat of his car. Blood was on his head. Mrs. Kennedy cried, "Oh no!" And